New details have surfaced about Bryant Dragon Arnold's sudden disappearance from the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, and what insiders claim forced him to walk away is far more unsettling than what the show ever revealed. For 3 seasons, Dragon stood as the ranch's gatekeeper, protector, and enforcer. But behind the scenes, something was happening to him that got progressively worse. Tonight, we uncover the disturbing truth about why he really left. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. From the very beginning of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, Bryant Dragon Arnold wasn't just a security chief. He was the wall between the crew and whatever lived beneath that cursed mesa. When viewers first met him, he looked like a man who had already seen too much. The folded arms, the cold stare, the clipped answers. Dragon didn't talk like normal guards. He talked like someone who believed the ranch itself was aware, watching, waiting for mistakes. What most people don't realize is that Dragon wasn't hired for TV. He had been on the ranch long before cameras ever showed up. Brandon Fugel trusted him more than anyone else on the property. His job wasn't just to protect the team from trespassers. His job was to protect the outside world from what might slip out. Even in the early episodes, his behavior hinted at someone carrying a secret. While Travis Taylor and the scientists chased anomalies, Dragon stayed back, scanning the tree line like he expected something to step out. He memorized every blind spot, every shadow, every place where the air felt wrong. He rarely smiled, he rarely blinked, and he never let his guard down, even for a second. The crew joked about his seriousness, but insiders claimed it wasn't an act. Dragon had witnessed events that weren't televised, incidents the production company refused to show because they didn't know how to explain them. A nighttime distortion that moved like a solid mass, a figure pacing near Homestead, 2, when no one else was on that side of the property. A sound recorded near the winter shed that technicians described as metal bending underwater. Dragon never told the full stories, but everyone who worked around him knew this. Something had changed him before filming ever began. He treated the ranch not as a location, but as a threat. And over time, that mindset, combined with the things he saw behind closed doors, would become the reason he walked away from the show entirely. Because deep down, Dragon believed the ranch wasn't just dangerous. He believed it was escalating. Dragon never talked much about fear. In fact, most people assumed he didn't feel it. But the moment that began pulling him away from the show, the moment that started the unraveling, happened late one night near the south fence line. It wasn't filmed, it wasn't logged, and it wasn't part of any episode. It was something the crew whispered about in private, lowering their voices like they were afraid the ranch might overhear. That night, Dragon was walking the perimeter with 2 crew members after strange radio interference spiked across every channel. They expected to find trespassers or maybe an equipment malfunction. Instead, the temperature dropped hard and fast, like the air had been sucked out of the valley. The men's breath hung thick in the darkness. Even the insects stopped making sound. That's when Dragon noticed it, an outline standing in front of the ridge, tall, motionless, backlit by nothing but moonlight. At first, he thought it was a shadow. Then it moved, not like a human, not like an animal. It shifted sideways, as if gliding across the ground without stepping. One of the camera operators muttered, "What the hell is that?" But Dragon didn't answer. His hand hovered over his sidearm, not drawing, just bracing. The figure paused in front of the mesa slope, then vanished. Not walked away, not ran. It blinked out. The men stood frozen, but Dragon stepped forward slowly, as if pulled by a force he couldn't explain. He scanned the ridge, ordered the others back, and radioed base. But the radio shrieked, not static, not distortion, an inhuman metallic warping noise that made both men cover their ears. After the interference cleared, Dragon spoke only 2 words: "Shut it." The next morning, he acted like nothing happened, but everyone noticed the change. He stared at the mesa longer. He patrolled in silence. He stopped joking with the camera crew. Something was weighing on him, something he didn't want on tape. Something he didn't want analyzed, replayed, or discussed. And whatever he saw that night near the ridge, it shook the unshakable. It was the first sign that Dragon wasn't just protecting the ranch. He was trying to protect himself from whatever had finally noticed him back. In the weeks after the ridge encounter, Dragon kept insisting everything was fine. Just operational stress, just long hours, just the job. But the crew knew better. They'd worked with him long enough to understand that Dragon only shut down when something truly rattled him. And soon, a second event pushed him further from the show than anyone realized. It happened inside the command trailer, what Dragon used to call his safe place. Nothing strange happened in that trailer. No cold spots, no equipment failures, no unexplained shadows. It was the one building everyone trusted. But one night, shortly after midnight, as Dragon was reviewing drone footage alone, every monitor in front of him froze at the exact same frame. A frame that shouldn't have existed. On every screen, from every angle, the footage showed the same image. A silhouette standing behind Dragon inside the trailer, only a few feet from where he sat. It wasn't tall. It wasn't monstrous. It looked wrong in a completely different way. It looked human, but the proportions were distorted. Too long, too narrow. The angles bent like something was wearing the shape of a human but didn't know how to fit inside it. Dragon spun around instantly, hand on his weapon, but nothing was there. The air behind him was ice cold, almost wet, like he had opened a freezer door. The monitors flickered again. The silhouette was gone. Then, one by one, each screen replayed the last 2 seconds of the footage backward, without any input from him. Dragon hit keys, slammed the power button, yanked the cables, but it didn't matter. The screens stayed on, playing the same impossibly reversed footage of something standing right where he had been sitting. The distortion formed a kind of shape around the figure, like static was outlining it. But the face was the worst part. It was blurred, smeared like wet paint, except 2 dark hollows stared out from the center of it, watching him, evaluating him. By the time the system finally powered down, Dragon was shaken in a way no one had ever seen. When the tech crew checked the equipment the next morning, they found no corrupted files, no glitch logs, no abnormal activity. There was no trace of the silhouette, no evidence the monitors had ever malfunctioned, no proof anything had happened at all. But Dragon knew what he saw, and from that night forward, he refused to stay in the trailer alone. He kept the lights on longer, slept less, and checked the door locks twice as often. Because whatever had appeared behind him wasn't just watching the ranch, it was watching him, and it wanted him to know it. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine nighttime perimeter sweep. Dragon had done hundreds of them, walking the fence line, checking sensors, logging wildlife activity. But this time, the air felt wrong. The moment he stepped outside, even the other security guys later admitted they could feel it too. A heaviness, like the entire ranch was holding its breath. Halfway through the sweep, Dragon radioed in with something strange. His voice wasn't panic, not yet, but it carried an edge the team wasn't used to hearing. "Do you copy? I'm getting movement near Sector C, but it's not tripping the ground sensors." The team checked the system. Dragon was right. No alerts, no thermal spikes, nothing. But he kept whispering that something was pacing him through the trees, staying just out of sight. He said he could hear it. Slow steps, crunching dirt, the soft push of branches. But the thermal drone showed only Dragon. Then, suddenly, he stopped answering the radio. The command trailer erupted with noise, everyone shouting, scrambling to reach him. By the time they arrived at the far corner of the property, they found Dragon standing perfectly still, staring at the old cottonwood tree near the ravine. His flashlight hung loosely in his hand, beam pointed at the ground. His pupils were dilated, his breath shallow, like he had just seen something that didn't belong in this world. One of the crew called his name. Dragon didn't react. It wasn't until Thomas physically grabbed his shoulder that he snapped out of it, gasping like someone had held him underwater. When they asked what happened, he didn't answer. He just kept shaking his head, whispering, "You didn't see it. You didn't see what was there." They searched the area. No footprints, no thermal traces, no broken branches. Nothing that explained the terror still trembling through him. But when they reviewed Dragon's body cam, something even more unsettling emerged. At the exact moment, Dragon stopped responding. The microphone picked up a faint clicking noise. Soft, rhythmic, unnatural. Not an animal, not machinery. Something else. Something responding to him. Then a low, distorted whisper layered under the clicking. "Come back. The audio techs tried to isolate the sound, filter it, enhance it, but the deeper they analyzed it, the stranger it became. The waveform wasn't consistent with any known voice pattern, it wasn't human, and it wasn't mechanical. It was something in between. When they showed Dragon the clip, he refused to listen to it. He walked out of the trailer without saying a word. And later that night, he told the cameras something he'd never admitted before. "I'm not scared of this place because of what it can do. I'm scared because sometimes it feels like it already knows us, knows me." That night, Dragon didn't finish his sweep. For the first time in the show's history, he refused to go back out into the dark. Something had been waiting for him out there, and whatever it was, it wanted him alone. After the incident at the cottonwood tree, Dragon tried to return to work as if nothing had happened, but the crew noticed something immediately. He was different, more guarded, more restless, and for the first time since he joined the team, Dragon started keeping things off record. It began when he insisted on reviewing all overnight surveillance footage alone, hours before the rest of the team arrived. At first, nobody questioned it. They assumed he was trying to make sense of what he'd experienced. But then, the system logs revealed something odd. Several files had been accessed, viewed, and then manually copied into an encrypted folder under Dragon's personal login. Footage that was no longer accessible to anyone else. When asked about it, Dragon brushed it off as routine security archiving, but the explanation didn't sit right. He never did that before, and he certainly never locked the team out of data. Then came the night Brandon Fugel himself flew in, responding to a message Dragon sent privately. The cameras caught their silhouettes inside the command trailer, voices muted, door locked. No one ever learned what Dragon showed him. But when Brandon walked out, he looked rattled, shaken in a way the ranch had never visibly affected him before. The only clue came from the drone operator, who swore he saw Dragon carrying a small metal case out to his truck later that evening, something he had pulled from the restricted storage room where only the highest-level evidence was kept. Whatever was inside it, Dragon placed it gently on the passenger seat and drove off without a word. The next morning, he returned to the ranch pale, exhausted, and refusing to talk about where he had gone. But the change was unmistakable. Dragon had always been strict, intense, sometimes paranoid, but now he was something else entirely. He was afraid, not of intruders, not of trespassers, but of the thing he had locked in that case. Something the ranch had shown him, something he didn't want the others to see, something he feared would change everything if it ever became public. And from that day forward, Dragon stopped trusting the ranch's systems. He stopped trusting the investigation, and worst of all, he stopped trusting the crew. Dragon tried to hide it, but the fear was starting to bleed through his hardened exterior. He stopped walking the property alone. He double-checked every camera angle, every infrared sweep, every motion sensor. He even began carrying 2 radios, something no one had ever seen him do. And still, none of it prepared him for what happened during the final incident that pushed him toward the edge. It began just after sunset. The team was in the command center reviewing the anomalies from the previous night when Dragon abruptly stiffened, staring at the monitor showing the northern fence line. A single motion sensor had triggered, just one, but the cameras picked up nothing. No animals, no vehicles, no movement, just empty darkness. Dragon muttered, "That's not nothing," and grabbed his gear. At first, the others assumed he was going alone again, but he didn't. He stormed out of the trailer, breathing hard, scanning the horizon like something was calling him. When Travis tried to follow, Dragon held up a hand, an unspoken warning. The crew watched him approach the fence line, his flashlight slicing through the growing fog. Everything looked normal, too normal. No footprints, no tracks, no thermal signatures. Then the radios crackled, first with static, then with Dragon's voice, but warped like it was coming through water. "It's here again." The entire command room fell silent. "I can't see it, but it's close. Close enough to..." His voice cut out, replaced by a low distortion that sounded disturbingly like breathing. Travis tried to call him back. No answer. The team sprinted toward his location, their headlights tearing through the night, but before they reached him, The sensors around Dragon began firing in sequence, north, then east, then west, like something was circling him at impossible speed. When they finally reached the fence line, they found Dragon standing rigid, facing the tree line. His flashlight lay at his feet, the beam angled upward like it had been dropped mid-motion. His eyes were wide, not terrified, but furious, like he was staring down something that pushed him past fear and straight into anger. "What did you see?" Thomas asked, panting. Dragon didn't turn, didn't blink. He whispered only one sentence. "It wasn't outside the fence. It was behind me." The team spun around, scanning the empty field. Nothing was there. Not a figure, not a shape, not even a thermal reading. But Dragon wouldn't move, wouldn't even lower his voice. "That thing was close enough to touch me." When they finally escorted him back to the trailer, Dragon locked the door behind him and refused to talk for nearly an hour. When he emerged, he said something that left the entire team stunned. "This ranch isn't reacting to us anymore. It's choosing who it shows itself to." And from the way he said it, they knew who it had chosen. Last, Dragon. After the incident at the fence line, Dragon tried to act normal, walking the perimeter, checking the logs, pretending everything was fine. But the team saw the cracks forming. He stopped cracking jokes. He didn't bark orders as sharply. He avoided certain areas of the ranch entirely, especially the northern stretch, where the radios had distorted his voice. But the breaking point came 3 days later. The night was dead quiet, the kind of silence that presses on your chest. The team was inside reviewing footage when one of the monitors flickered, a glitch that lasted only a second. But in that second, the screen showed something that shouldn't have been there. A silhouette standing directly behind Dragon on footage from the previous night. Tall, thin, featureless. And Dragon had never reported seeing anyone. Thomas froze the frame, zooming in, but the image degraded instantly, like something was actively corrupting it. When Dragon walked into the command center, the room went silent. He saw the frozen image on the screen and stiffened. For a moment, he didn't breathe. "That wasn't there," he muttered. Travis stepped forward. "Dragon, that figure was behind you. You mean to tell me you didn't see anything?" "No," he snapped, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. Then the radios hissed again. Everyone turned. A voice whispered through the static, broken, distant, impossible to place. At first it sounded like interference. Then, unmistakably, it formed a word. "Brian!" The team looked at Dragon, his real name. Only a handful of people ever called him that. The radio crackled again, the whisper stretching into a low, distorted imitation, repeating his name, almost mocking it. Dragon stood frozen, his jaw clenched tight, his knuckles white as he gripped the desk. "That's not interference," Travis said quietly. Dragon didn't answer. He just stared at the speaker, breathing through his teeth like he was holding back a wave of anger or panic. Then the whisper returned, clearer this time, and every hair on the back of Dragon's neck stood up. "Behind you." Dragon spun so fast that he knocked over a chair. Nothing was there. But the moment he turned, the entire command center's temperature dropped, the cameras flickered, and the same silhouette from the still frame appeared again, this time on a live feed, standing exactly where Dragon had just been. When he saw it, Dragon whispered something none of them had ever heard from him before. "I'm done." And for the first time on record, Dragon walked out of the command center without finishing a lockdown. Dragon didn't return to the command center for the rest of the night. He stayed outside alone, pacing along the dirt road that led toward the gate. Every few minutes he would stop, turn sharply, and stare into the tree line, as if expecting something to step out. The team watched him from the monitors, unsure whether to intervene or give him space. But the truth was already settling in. The ranch had crossed a line with him. By sunrise, Dragon was sitting on the tailgate of his truck, shoulders slumped, staring at the ground like a man replaying something in his head over and over again. When Travis approached, Dragon didn't look up. "It's not the ranch," he muttered. "It's me." Travis frowned. "What does that mean?" Dragon took a long breath. "This place, it doesn't follow you. It chooses you." He rubbed his face with both hands. "And something out there chose me a long time ago." It was the closest thing to a confession he'd ever given. He explained carefully that before the show ever aired, before Brandon ever bought the ranch, something appeared to him on the West Ridge during a nighttime patrol, a shimmering distortion, that moved without sound, bending the air around it. He never filed a report, never told the scientists, never mentioned it on camera. "It watched me," he whispered, like it already knew everything about me. The team listened in stunned silence. This wasn't Dragon the security chief talking. This was Brian Arnold, the man behind the persona, finally admitting what he'd hidden for years. "And now, it's back," he finished. "It's following me again." When the crew prepared for the next investigation, Dragon didn't suit up. He walked to Brandon's truck, dropped his security badge onto the hood, and said only one sentence: "If I stay here, it won't stop." He didn't wait for a response. He got into his own truck, turned the engine over, and drove toward the long dirt road leading off the property, the road he had guarded for years. The cameras caught one final shot of him in the rearview mirror, his face pale, eyes fixed on the mesa behind him. A week later, Brandon confirmed privately to the crew Dragon had officially stepped away. No contract dispute, no argument, no falling out with production. He left because something on the ranch wasn't just observing him anymore, it was calling him by name, and he refused to stay long enough to hear what it wanted next.
Ground-penetrating radar found a massive metallic structure buried 200 feet beneath Skinwalker Ranch. It's 300 feet long with perfect geometric angles that geology cannot create. Material density suggests metal alloys that don't exist in surrounding rock. The structure has been there for 2,000 to 3,500 years based on sediment layers above it. Most shocking, it's still active, generating electromagnetic pulses every 47 seconds. Subscribe now because what's buried under that Utah mesa predates known civilization and is operational ancient technology that scientists cannot explain. The discovery of the massive underground structure at Skinwalker Ranch wasn't a single eureka moment, but rather the culmination of months of systematic scientific investigation using progressively more sophisticated scanning technologies that built upon initial anomalous readings that the team couldn't explain through conventional geological or natural phenomena. The investigation began when Dr. Travis Taylor, the ranch's chief scientist with doctorates in optical science, aerospace systems engineering, and astronomy, was analyzing electromagnetic field data collected during routine monitoring of the property and noticed consistent anomalies emanating from beneath the mesa rather than from the airspace above, where most of the ranch's documented phenomena typically manifest. The electromagnetic readings showed regular pulse patterns originating from underground that were too consistent, too structured, and too mathematically precise to be natural geological processes like piezoelectric effects from shifting rock layers under tectonic pressure or random mineral deposits creating magnetic interference. Travis proposed conducting ground-penetrating radar surveys to determine if there was a physical source for these electromagnetic emissions beneath the surface, and Brandon Fugel approved the substantial expenditure for commercial GPR equipment capable of imaging subsurface structures. The initial scans using standard archaeological ground-penetrating radar equipment could only penetrate approximately 30 feet deep, showing tantalizing hints of density anomalies that suggested something unusual was buried at greater depth, but not providing clear imaging of whatever was generating the deeper electromagnetic signatures. Recognizing the limitations of standard equipment, Brandon made the decision to bring in industrial-grade ground-penetrating radar typically used for mining surveys and deep geological assessments, equipment capable of imaging structures to depths exceeding 300 feet below the surface. These more powerful scans, conducted over a 2-week period covering the entire mesa area in a systematic grid pattern, revealed the full scope of the buried structure for the first time, showing a massive geometric object at a depth that placed it well below any known archaeological layers or historical human activity in the region. The data was so unexpected and contradicted known geology so dramatically that Travis initially suspected equipment malfunction or misinterpretation of natural geological features like lava tubes or mineral deposits. To verify the findings and eliminate the possibility of equipment error, Brandon contracted 3 separate independent geophysical survey companies to conduct their own scans of the same area using completely different technologies: gravimetric sensors measuring subtle gravitational field variations, seismic reflection surveys, and electromagnetic induction mapping. The technical specifications of the buried structure revealed through multiple independent scanning technologies provide unprecedented detail about its characteristics, dimensions, and properties that definitively distinguish it from any known natural geological formation or human construction in the archaeological record. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted over 6 months using multiple frequencies and scanning angles revealed an object buried approximately 200 to 250 feet beneath the mesa's surface, positioned at a depth that places it well below any known archaeological layers, historical human settlements, or mining operations that might have occurred in the region throughout documented history. The structure measures approximately 300 feet in length, 150 feet in width, and an estimated 40 feet in height based on radar returns and density analysis, making it roughly the size of a modern commercial building buried completely underground. What makes the object unmistakably artificial rather than natural is its geometric precision that violates every principle of how geological features form through natural processes. The radar images show straight edges forming perfect right angles, parallel surfaces maintaining absolutely consistent distances across hundreds of feet, and symmetrical proportions that natural rock formations simply cannot exhibit because geological features form through processes like erosion, sedimentation, volcanic activity, and tectonic forces that create irregular, organic, asymmetrical shapes. The underground anomaly at Skinwalker Ranch displays all the hallmarks of deliberate construction following a geometric design blueprint with mathematical precision. Material composition analysis using advanced gravimetric sensors that measure subtle variations in gravitational fields caused by different material densities revealed that the structure is significantly denser than the surrounding sandstone and limestone geology of the mesa. The density readings suggest the object contains metallic elements in concentrations far exceeding anything that would occur naturally in that specific geological context through mineral deposits or ore formations. Spectrographic analysis of electromagnetic signatures bouncing off the structure and returning to surface sensors indicates the presence of metals and possibly engineered metal alloys that don't match the iron oxide traces, copper deposits, and standard mineral content of the surrounding sedimentary rock layers. Most puzzling is the structure's orientation and positioning within the geological strata. It's not aligned with any natural geological features, fault lines, or sedimentary layers, but appears to have been deliberately placed at a specific location and precise depth, as if whoever or whatever constructed it wanted it hidden beneath a specific thickness of overburden but still at a recoverable depth rather than buried so deep it could never be accessed by future civilizations with drilling technology. The most unsettling and scientifically inexplicable aspect of the underground structure at Skinwalker Ranch isn't simply that it exists or appears artificially constructed, it's that the object is actively generating electromagnetic fields and energy emissions that prove it remains operational despite being buried for what geological analysis suggests could be thousands of years. This discovery transformed the investigation from an archaeological curiosity into a potential technological revelation that challenges fundamental assumptions about ancient civilizations and the limits of preserved functionality over geological timescales. Dr. Travis Taylor's electromagnetic monitoring equipment, positioned at multiple locations across the mesa and calibrated to detect extremely subtle field variations, detected pulses emanating from the buried structure at remarkably regular intervals averaging every 47 seconds. These pulses aren't random electromagnetic fluctuations or background noise from natural sources like lightning, solar radiation, or Earth's magnetosphere, but rather structured emissions with consistent frequency patterns, predictable amplitude variations, and directional characteristics that indicate deliberate signal generation rather than passive electromagnetic leakage from degrading metallic materials corroding underground. The energy signature operates primarily in frequencies between 1.6 and 2.2 gigahertz, a range that overlaps with modern satellite communications, radar systems, and wireless data transmission, but with modulation patterns that don't match any known human technology or natural electromagnetic phenomena documented in scientific literature. Most significantly, Travis discovered through months of careful correlation analysis that the underground electromagnetic emissions correspond precisely with anomalous phenomena observed above ground at Skinwalker Ranch. When the buried structure pulses with higher intensity electromagnetic bursts, the team simultaneously records increased UAP activity in the airspace directly above the mesa, sudden radiation spikes in specific areas of the property that trigger Geiger counters and dosimeters, and cascading equipment malfunctions affecting GPS navigation, radio communications, weapons, drone flight systems, and sensitive electronic instruments. The correlation between underground pulses and surface phenomena is too consistent, too precise, and too mathematically correlated to be coincidental, suggesting the buried structure is either causing the aerial phenomena through some unknown energy projection mechanism, communicating with whatever creates those phenomena through electromagnetic signaling, or serving as a beacon or homing device that attracts unknown entities or craft to this specific location. Analysis of the energy emission patterns reveals sophisticated characteristics that challenge explanation through any conventional framework. Determining the age of the buried structure at Skinwalker Ranch has proven extraordinarily challenging because conventional archaeological dating methods like radiocarbon dating of organic materials or thermoluminescence of fired ceramics require physical samples extracted from the object itself, which the team doesn't have access to without conducting full-scale excavation that involves drilling through 200 feet of sediment and rock. However, geological analysis of the sediment and rock layers positioned above the structure provides compelling indirect evidence about minimum age that has profound and disturbing implications for the timeline of advanced technological civilization in North America. Geological core samples extracted from multiple locations across the mesa using specialized drilling equipment show undisturbed sedimentary layers extending continuously from the current ground surface down to the depth where the buried structure is located. These layers represent hundreds or potentially thousands of years of continuous natural deposition created through wind erosion carrying dust and particles, seasonal water flow depositing silt and minerals, organic decomposition from plants and animals creating soil overburden, and gradual accumulation of volcanic ash from distant eruptions settling across the landscape over centuries. The critical scientific observation that eliminates recent human burial as an explanation is that none of these sedimentary layers show any evidence of disturbance, excavation, or backfilling that would necessarily occur if humans had dug a massive hole measuring 300 feet long and 150 feet wide, lowered or constructed a building-sized object into that excavation, and then refilled the hole with soil and rock. If the structure had been placed underground at any point in recent historical or even prehistoric human history, the geological record would show clear disruption signatures in the sediment layers, mixed soil horizons, disturbed stratification, tool marks, compaction differences between original geology and backfilled material. The complete absence of such disturbance indicators in the core samples suggests the structure was already in its current position before the overlying sediment began accumulating naturally through geological processes operating over extended timescales. Geological dating of the sediment layers directly above the structure using optically stimulated luminescence, a technique that measures when mineral grains were last exposed to sunlight before being buried, indicates the overburden has been accumulating for approximately 2,000 to 3,500 years, meaning the structure must have been in place before that accumulation period began. This timeline predates any known advanced civilization in North America capable of creating sophisticated geometric construction at this scale, with apparent metallic composition and ongoing electromagnetic functionality. Determining the actual purpose and function of the buried structure at Skinwalker Ranch requires analyzing the energy patterns, emission characteristics, and behavioral responses documented through years of monitoring, leading investigators to several competing theories about what this ancient technology was designed to accomplish and whether it's still performing its original mission after thousands of years underground. Dr. Travis Taylor's analysis of the electromagnetic emissions provides the most compelling clues about functional purpose based on the signature characteristics of the pulses and their correlation with external phenomena. The regular pulsing electromagnetic fields operating in gigahertz frequency ranges closely match the operational patterns of modern radar systems, long-range communications arrays, or sophisticated sensor networks designed to detect and track objects or phenomena across vast distances. The fact that emissions operate on precise mathematical intervals rather than random or chaotic patterns suggests deliberate engineering for a specific functional purpose rather than accidental byproduct of material degradation or geological processes. Travis's leading theory proposes the structure functions as an ancient monitoring station that has been passively observing Earth, specific celestial phenomena, or dimensional boundaries from for millennia, automatically collecting data through its sensor systems and potentially transmitting compiled information to unknown receivers through the electromagnetic pulses detected by surface equipment. The emissions correlation with astronomical cycles provides supporting evidence for this monitoring station hypothesis. The structure's energy output varies in predictable patterns aligned with Earth's 24-hour rotation, shows amplitude changes corresponding to lunar orbital phases, and exhibits frequency modulations that track solar activity cycles, including sunspot formation and coronal mass ejections. This astronomical synchronization suggests whatever technology exists underground remains actively tracking planetary dynamics and celestial mechanics, maintaining operational alignment with cosmic rhythms despite being buried beneath hundreds of feet of accumulated sediment. Alternative functional theories proposed by team members and outside experts include power generation or energy collection capabilities, with the structure possibly serving as a geothermal energy harvesting facility that taps into Earth's internal heat, an electromagnetic field collection system that draws power from the planet's magnetosphere, or an exotic energy conversion technology that operates on principles beyond current scientific understanding. The consistent kilowatt range power output, detected through surface measurements over extended monitoring periods without any apparent fuel source or external power input, suggests either an incredibly efficient internal power generation system or environmental energy harvesting that has operated continuously for thousands of years without maintenance or refueling. Within hours of Brandon Fugal making public announcements about the underground structure discovered at Skinwalker Ranch during a scientific conference presentation, federal government agencies launched a coordinated and aggressive response clearly designed to suppress information, control access to the discovery site, and potentially prosecute Brandon and his team for violating national security restrictions that appeared to have been retroactively applied to cover this specific situation. The speed and intensity of the government's reaction strongly suggested they were already monitoring the Skinwalker Ranch investigation and had contingency plans ready to execute immediately if Brandon went public with findings about the buried structure. Department of Defense officials contacted Brandon directly by phone before he had even departed the conference venue where he made his announcement, demanding he immediately cease all public discussion, turn over all scan data and analysis results to federal custody, and halt any plans for excavation or further investigation of the underground anomaly. The officials cited national security concerns and invoked provisions of federal law allowing classification of discoveries on private property if they relate to technologies, materials, or information deemed relevant to defense interests or potential threats to national security. Brandon's legal team was simultaneously served with formal notices, warning that any further public disclosure of technical information about the underground structure could result in prosecution under espionage statutes, typically reserved for cases involving disclosure of classified weapon systems or intelligence operations. Pentagon lawyers argued in these legal notices that the electromagnetic signatures, potential advanced materials, and unknown technology represented by the buried structure automatically fell under government jurisdiction for mandatory national security review, regardless of whether the technology originated from human or non-human sources, and regardless of the fact that it was discovered on private property legally owned by Brandon Fugal. Most aggressive and revealing was the government's immediate attempt to acquire Skinwalker Ranch itself through purchase or legal seizure. Federal officials contacted Brandon within days of his announcement with offers to purchase the property at substantially above market value, framing the acquisition as a generous opportunity that would allow him to avoid potential legal complications, financial penalties, and criminal prosecution that might result from continued private ownership and investigation of a site now deemed relevant to national security. When Brandon firmly refused to sell despite increasingly generous financial offers, the tone of government communications shifted dramatically to threats of eminent domain proceedings where federal authorities could forcibly acquire the property by claiming national security necessity, justified overriding private property rights. Dr. Travis Taylor's comprehensive scientific analysis of the underground structure at Skinwalker Ranch represents the most detailed technical examination of potentially non-human or ancient advanced technology ever conducted by a credentialed scientist willing to stake his professional reputation on findings that mainstream academia refuses to acknowledge or seriously consider. Travis holds multiple advanced degrees, including doctorates in optical science and engineering, aerospace systems engineering, and astronomy, giving him unique multidisciplinary qualifications to analyze the complex technical aspects of electromagnetic emissions, material science, structural engineering, and astronomical correlations that this discovery encompasses. His technical breakdown addresses three fundamental questions that define the significance of this find. What materials comprise the structure based on indirect analysis through scanning technologies? What functional purpose does it serve based on its energy emissions and behavioral patterns? And who or what entity possessed the technological capability to construct such a system and bury it at this location thousands of years ago? Material composition analysis based on electromagnetic induction responses, gravimetric measurements, and radar return characteristics indicates the structure contains metallic elements with density and conductivity properties, suggesting titanium-based alloys, stainless steel compositions, or possibly engineered materials not found in Earth's natural geological processes. The electromagnetic reflectivity patterns captured by ground-penetrating radar show the structure has a layered construction architecture with different materials at various depths and positions within the object. Similar to how modern engineered structures use different materials for different functional purposes: structural support, electromagnetic shielding, thermal management, equipment housing, rather than being carved from solid uniform rock or cast from single composition metal. Travis's analysis of the energy emission characteristics provides the most compelling evidence about functional purpose and ongoing operational status. The regular electromagnetic pulsing at 47-second intervals operating in gigahertz frequency bands matches signature patterns associated with radar systems designed for long-range detection, communications arrays transmitting data across vast distances, or sensor networks collecting and processing environmental information. The modulation patterns within these pulses show characteristics suggesting encoded information rather than simple carrier waves, implying the structure may be actively transmitting data about observations, measurements, or detected phenomena to receivers at unknown locations. Most intriguing is Travis's documentation of how the underground emissions synchronize with astronomical phenomena, including Earth's rotation creating 12-hour cyclical patterns, lunar phases causing predictable amplitude variations, and solar activity triggering frequency modulations. Brandon Fugel's decision to excavate despite government warnings required months of preparation, specialized drilling equipment capable of reaching 300+ feet, international teams of scientists and engineers, comprehensive safety protocols, and armed security to prevent federal interference. The strategy called for phased approach, preliminary test drilling at the structure's edge, remote sensing through drill holes, then controlled access shaft if safe. But as drill bits approached within 50 feet of the structure's surface, everything went wrong. Electromagnetic detectors registered massive energy spikes exceeding years of monitoring data. Equipment failed catastrophically. GPS lost satellite lock. Radios filled with static and strange tones. Cameras recorded distorted images. Most alarming were immediate health effects. Crew members experienced sudden headaches, nausea, disorientation, and nosebleeds attributed to radiation exposure or electromagnetic field interaction. Bryant Arnold's warnings about the structure defending itself proved accurate. The operation was immediately suspended. Some team members now refuse to participate in any further excavation attempts, convinced disturbing the technology triggers protective responses. If confirmed through excavation, this discovery rewrites everything. Proof of advanced civilization in North America thousands of years before mainstream archaeology acknowledges. Evidence of non-human intelligence on Earth in the distant past. The possibility human development isn't linear but cyclical. Advanced civilizations rising and falling throughout prehistory. This technology at Skinwalker Ranch could rewrite textbooks about human origins and our place in the universe. The truth buried beneath Utah desert is about to expose that we're not the first advanced civilization on this planet. History as we know it is wrong.
Beneath the rugged terrain of Skinwalker Ranch lies a cabin investigators were never meant to find. A weather-beaten patrol shelter used by the ranch's head of security, known only as Dragon, has now been exposed as far more than a rest stop. What began as a routine patrol post unraveled into a classified containment chamber tied to decades-old psychological studies. What they dug up forced internal security to seal the site, possibly forever. Tonight, we uncover the truth hidden beneath the floorboards and why Dragan may have never been the guard. He was the test subject. Long before anyone on the current research team even knew it existed, the patrol cabin now associated with Dragan sat half-buried in silence at the farthest edge of Skinwalker Ranch. From a distance, it looked harmless, a faded structure with weather-beaten boards, a sagging corrugated roof, and a door that creaked in the wind like any forgotten storage shed meant for emergency supplies or feed sacks. Most new arrivals barely glanced at it. A building like that makes sense on a ranch often battered by storms. It blended in like a scar that time simply stopped noticing, but the silence surrounding it was louder than the wind that rattled its walls. The first sign something was off didn't come from inside, but from above. Years later, when aerial mapping was done for site monitoring, analysts noticed the cabin didn't appear on any historical construction record. No listing, no permits, no maintenance logs, nothing in prior land development files matched its presence. It was as if it wasn't supposed to be there. At first, staff assumed it had been added during the previous ownership transition. But when deeper archives were pulled, government land surveys from decades before showed that exact spot marked as Restricted Research Point, even before Skinwalker Ranch became public. Meaning, the cabin wasn't built where it made sense. It was built where something was already waiting. Satellite scans then revealed a second anomaly. The building's coordinates fell within a classified sensor monitoring zone, one that hadn't been disclosed during acquisition. Yet, no external power lines connected to it, no communications relay, nothing that explained why the site was flagged. Internal employees later admitted they ignored it at first because some locations on the ranch are better left undocumented. But that changed the day Dragan was assigned there, not to protect what was inside, but to unknowingly interact with it. Because someone, somewhere, already knew that the cabin was never meant to serve people. It was meant to study them. When investigators finally entered the cabin with full structural clearance, their first observation was confusion. Ranch buildings are typically assembled with utility in mind: straight beams, salvaged lumber, visible nails, basic insulation. This cabin followed none of those conventions. The interior dimensions measured nearly 3 feet larger than the external foundation, an impossibility without intentionally engineered manipulation. Nails were embedded in spiral configurations rather than linear framing, indicating repeated internal reconstruction, not to repair weather damage, but to modify chamber layout. Someone had rebuilt parts of it from the inside many times, not due to decay, but precision. Underneath the rotting floorboards, something far more alarming emerged: industrial-grade electromagnetic grounding plates, the kind used in classified laboratory environments designed to prevent external signal interference or contamination of energy readings. These plates weren't just installed, they were anchored above soil that appeared chemically sterilized. Multiple layers of metallic shielding were positioned to block frequencies rather than protect from weather. No ranch utility shed would ever require that level of electromagnetic suppression. In fact, it shouldn't even be possible to install such technology that deep without formal contracting, heavy machinery, and recorded power logistics. Yet no construction files existed, no record of delivery trucks, no engineering correspondences, nothing. Environmental sensors inside the cabin displayed temperature fluctuations in exact 5-degree increments at scheduled intervals, regulated with precision akin to controlled lab testing. Dust drifted abnormally, collecting only on surfaces away from hidden sensor alignments. Even the air felt unnaturally dense, as though designed to transmit static memory rather than store humidity. According to sensory log reconstruction, the space behaved less like shelter and more like an active test chamber tuned to interact with living cognitive presence. When the engineering blueprints surfaced through partial digital recovery, the reality became undeniable. The cabin was not built to protect staff from ranch phenomena. It was built to maintain sustained exposure to it. A passive observation box manipulated to seem harmless, yet designed like a waiting trap with layered influence circuitry embedded into every board and beam. The real question wasn't how it was built without anyone noticing. It was who approved constructing a psychological mechanical exposure chamber disguised as a ranch shack. Dragan officially joined the security division, believing his role was standard: monitoring restricted zones, tracking perimeter breaches, deterring trespassers. On paper, his assignment seemed logical. In reality, he had been marked for this role years earlier. Data reconstruction from decrypted research archives revealed that his employment file overlapped with psychological compatibility assessments from a retired Cold War behavioral project. Traits flagged as ideal for long-term exposure testing: emotional restraint, high observational focus, strict adherence to routine, minimal reactive behavior, were identical to what his recruitment form highlighted as professional strengths. This match was not accidental. He fit a pre-established test subject profile. Internal logs recovered beneath the cabin listed those traits under a column labeled Subject Stability Threshold, Phase 3, Qualification. His name never appeared in full. Instead, his initials were cross-referenced next to coded reference strings, suggesting he was evaluated long before he stepped onto the property. What he believed was a standard security screening actually mirrored historical psychological trial formatting from classified personnel conditioning program. Investigators reviewing this alignment stated that he was not hired because he was well suited for security. He was placed because he was suited for influence induction. As months passed, changes in Dragan's personal logbook began reflecting subtle cognitive interference. Entries transitioned from precise, professionally structured reports to fragmented expressions of discomfort, short thoughts, incomplete sentences, increased emotional weight without clear trigger. In isolated recordings, he described sensing shifts in his mood and physical energy when near the cabin. He began noting feelings of being observed without environmental stimuli, unsure whether the pressure came from the land or something within his mind. His handwriting became uneven in extended shifts, aligning with what earlier documents classified as optimal affective disorientation patterns. What makes Dragan's case uniquely tragic is that he never volunteered for any experiment. He never even knew one was occurring. When researchers finally gained system-level clearance to investigate beneath Dragan's patrol cabin, they assumed they'd uncover forgotten wiring, weather damage, or perhaps improperly stored supplies. Instead, lifting the warped floorboards revealed something that did not resemble standard construction at all. A rectangular panel sat embedded deeper than typical foundation depth, sealed with cold industrial bolts that matched no commercial ranch hardware. The bolts were consistent with those used on sealed transport cases for classified laboratory assets, designed to survive high pressure, intense heat, and electromagnetic fluctuation. The panel led to a reinforced metal compartment professionally fabricated and insulated. This was not a repair zone. It was an installation. Inside lay an evidence-style containment tray, organized with the precision of a forensic archive. Each item had been methodically placed, not casually stored. Thick, tinted evidence vials were labeled with non-standard identifiers like ANOMA, ANOMC, and Refuse Human Study. No dates, no signature field, just lettering consistent with internal cataloging codes used in discontinued research programs marked high-risk biocontainment. Next to the vials sat a folded Kevlar pad bearing dried stains. Surface samples returned structure patterns inconsistent with human or registered wildlife blood. Machine analysis flagged the material as unclassified biological origin. Bone fragments were also found, smooth, unnaturally dense, chemically resistant, and slightly luminous under infrared spectrum scanning. The size was too small for any known large fauna, yet density scans suggested impact resistance beyond normal evolutionary design. The final layer contained a microfilm envelope labeled Echo Gateway Failure Report. Its contents detailed electromagnetic exposure testing, cognitive response analytics, and radiation pattern tracking. The last page read, "Subject destabilized, threshold exceeded, terminate field sequence." When researchers found Dragan's personal logbook buried deep inside his patrol bag, they expected routine entries, weather updates, ranch security checks, gate scans. What they uncovered instead was the slow unraveling of a man who believed believed he was simply guarding property, unaware he was the one being studied. Early pages appeared normal: neat handwriting, precise notes on trail status, and motion sensor activation times. But midway through the journal, the tone shifted. Sentences grew shorter, words broke apart, handwriting slanted unevenly as if written with a shaking hand. And then, the timestamps began contradicting themselves. Several entries repeated the exact same minute, but described different emotional states each time. One line read, 0317, felt normal. The next, 0317, pressure behind eyes, like something pushing thoughts into place. Some timestamps were marked days into the future, others looping backwards, mirroring what was later discovered in the compromised security footage. It was as if time inside Dragon's memory didn't follow the outside world. More disturbing were the margin notes. They looked like medical-style observations, written in smaller, more controlled script, as if someone else had added them later. But forensic analysis confirmed it was Dragon's handwriting, only written while his brain was under intense stress. The notes referenced forced cognitive shifting, emotional override, recall disruption patterns. At first, investigators thought he was documenting symptoms. Later, they realized he was mirroring language found in the microfilm experiments beneath the cabin. One passage stopped the review team cold. Something watches from inside the walls, not with eyes. It waits for me to react before it does. I dream of walking away, but wake up standing in the doorway. The breakthrough came when analysts overlaid Dragon's emotional peaks, recorded in his logbook, with electrical and energy fluctuation reports from devices installed unknowingly inside the cabin wall. What the team discovered still causes silence whenever it's mentioned in internal briefing. Each time Dragon documented a spike in stress, confusion, or sudden emotional collapse, the structural monitoring systems registered sharp electromagnetic surges at the exact same timestamp, down to the second. This meant the environment was not only reacting to him, it appeared to be tracking his mental state in real time. Archived data from the recovered files showed layout diagrams of the cabin labeled Anchor Zone, Cognitive Trigger Line, and Exposure Conduit. These were not ordinary structural markers. They matched terms used during classified Cold War field research involving prolonged isolation and interaction with non-standard environmental stimuli. The cabin, according to these blueprints, wasn't intended to protect him. It was built to encourage contact with an unseen influence. Further review found audio interference synchronized with Dragon's log entries. In recordings captured during his patrols, low-frequency pulses appeared intermittently whenever he expressed heightened fear in writing. Special sound analysis revealed nearly inaudible human-like resonance waves layered beneath the low hum. When separated digitally, these pulses formed rhythm patterns resembling neural response triggers used in cognitive field tests. That meant whatever was affecting him wasn't random. It was behaving as though it was responding. But the most alarming finding wasn't found in audio or electrical logs. It came from thermal mapping scans conducted months after his final entry. The scans revealed a consistent temperature dip, exactly 5 degrees, for 7-minute intervals, matching the precision of Dragon's behavior shifts mentioned in his journal. Exact timing, exact change, every single day. What the team uncovered next was something that had never been discussed on camera, not during official briefings, not even behind closed doors on the ranch. When experts finally processed the microfilm labeled Echo Gateway Failure Report, the contents shattered any remaining assumption that Dragon was merely the first person affected. It revealed there was a previous subject, someone who was never supposed to be mentioned again. The report, dated decades earlier, described an experimental phase that took place long before Skinwalker Ranch became known to the public. The subject was placed in a structure almost identical to Dragon's cabin. Same electromagnetic grid layout, same internal dimensions, same proximity to the anomaly. But unlike Dragon, that individual was not monitored openly. They were monitored remotely. And according to the final line of the failure report, contact escalation exceeded psychological tolerance threshold, resulting in systemic collapse. Nowhere did it mention a rescue attempt. Even more disturbing, temperature logs, behavioral field responses, and radiation interference patterns from that abandoned test perfectly mirrored Dragon's data nearly 40 years later. This implied that whatever force was interacting with him didn't just recognize the setup, it remembered it. It was behaving as if the experiment had restarted. Handwritten in the margin of one microfilm page were the words, "Pattern persists." Entity preference indicates continuity. That simple phrase terrified analysts. It meant what was being studied might not be reacting randomly. It was showing recognition. And then, just beneath that phrase, a final note in faded ink. Subject history must remain undisclosed. Current anchor unaware of precedent. The discovery of the envelope marked "If I don't come back" shifted the entire investigation from scientific analysis into something deeply personal and terrifying. It was not stored inside the locker, where evidence was meant to be kept. Instead, it was hidden behind a thin wooden panel near the back wall, like someone wanted it to remain secret unless things reached a point where returning was no longer an option. The message inside was short, written in Jason Dragon's own handwriting, but it read like the words of someone who no longer trusted his thoughts. He didn't speak about threats the way investigators expected. He didn't refer to a creature or a presence or even a direct danger. Instead, his message described a shift inside himself. He wrote that he began waking up in the cabin without remembering ever lying down. He felt emotional responses that did not match what he was thinking. And most chilling, he believed something was trying to learn through him. He described moments where he felt drawn back toward the cabin after leaving, like his instincts had been reprogrammed. At one point he wrote, "When my mind goes quiet, I feel it try to speak through the silence." That sentence alone broke several researchers emotionally. Next to the note was a small folded photo. It showed Dragon standing outside the cabin during normal patrol, appearing calm and focused. But what was handwritten on the back made experts question whether the person in the picture was even the same man who wrote the letter. The words read, "This is me," before the cabin noticed. The note ended with one final warning, left like a desperate instruction. Do not enter alone. The cabin does not forget who it watches. The final breakthrough came not from letters or hidden compartments, but from the last working camera pointed at the patrol cabin. At first glance, the recordings appeared normal. Quiet nights, still wind, empty ground. But just days before Dragon stopped showing up to work, the footage began displaying anomalies that experts still cannot explain. Time didn't move forward or backward. It began replaying itself differently. A minute of footage would play, then rewind, then repeat. But each time, tiny changes appeared. A rock that had been on one side of the frame would shift inches, even feet, without any visible movement. Tree branches bent at angles differing between loops. In one sequence, the cabin appeared wider than before, and then narrower in the next loop, despite never physically changing. The strangest clip showed a metal toolbox near the entrance, a toolbox that, according to team logs, was not placed there until 3 days after the timestamp on the recording. It was labeled as reverse time footage, reality recorded from the future. When researchers slowed the footage frame by frame, they noticed faint flashes along the screen edges, not camera glare, not insects, and not weather interference. The shapes matched the symbols found in the microfilm labeled Echo Gateway Failure Report, almost like whatever this was, it was trying to communicate. Soon after, things escalated. In one recording, the shadow of the camera pole began to fade until it disappeared altogether, even though the real pole was still standing outside. Then the entire image turned black. No error codes, no static, no signal loss, just silence. Over the next 24 hours, every camera facing the cabin stopped working the same way. Not because the devices broke, because something stopped allowing them to see. The decision was made to seal the cabin permanently. Dragon avoided interviews. The team locked the evidence, and Skinwalker Ranch quietly marked the area as restricted. Thomas Winterton finally revealed the truth about the near-fatal incident that almost ended his time on Skinwalker Ranch forever. And what he admitted is far more disturbing than anything the show has ever aired: long-buried secrets, medical anomalies, and a hidden event the crew was ordered never to discuss. Until now, what Winterton says nearly killed him changes everything we thought we understood about the ranch. Before we break down the full story, make sure you subscribe, because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning what's really happening beneath that ground. It started on a morning so ordinary that nothing about it should have been memorable, except that Thomas Winterton would later say he woke up with an uneasy heaviness behind his eyes, like pressure building before a storm. He shook it off, drove to the ranch, and stepped out into air that felt colder than it should have been. The sky was low, gray, and silent. Even the birds were quiet. That silence would make sense hours later. But at the time, Thomas took it as nothing more than another strange morning on the most unpredictable property in America. He met the crew near the West Access Road, clipboard tucked under his arm, as he reviewed the plans for that day's excavation. The sensors placed overnight had been picking up odd readings, low-frequency vibrations registering deep beneath the ground. Eric had flagged it. Travis wanted more scans, and Caleb joked nervously that the equipment must have been glitching again. But Winterton didn't laugh. The readings weren't random. They repeated in a rhythmic interval, like a pulse. Still, he pushed forward. The team began clearing soil from the edge of the dig, while Thomas moved closer to inspect the ground level. He crouched down, checking the displacement patterns, and noticed something that wasn't there the day before: a faint circular discoloration on the dirt, perfectly round, too perfect to be natural. He brushed his hand near it, but before he could touch the surface, the earth beneath his boot made a sound that froze him in place. A metallic pop. Not a crack, not a shift. A pop, as if something flexed under pressure. Thomas stepped back instinctively, but the next moment hit him before he even realized he was moving. A sudden burst of pressure slammed into the side of his skull, silent, invisible, and violent. His vision went white. An electric sting ripped across the top of his head, followed by a crushing pain that sent him staggering. He dropped to one knee, gripping the dirt as his ears filled with a deep, static roar. Caleb shouted his name. Eric ran toward him, but Thomas couldn't hear any of it. The pain wasn't outside his body. It was inside, as if something was expanding beneath his skin, pushing upward, threatening to split him open. Within seconds, the right side of his scalp ballooned outward in a grotesque swelling. The crew watched in horror as the lump grew, pulsing unnaturally like it had a heartbeat of its own. Thomas Winterton didn't know it yet, but this wasn't an injury. This was a reaction. Something under the ranch wasn't just warning them. It had reached for him specifically. By the time they got Thomas to the utility building, the swelling had doubled in size. It sat on the right side of his skull, angry, tight, and rising under the skin like something was trying to push its way out. Even seasoned emergency personnel struggled to hide their panic. This wasn't the type of injury that came from impact. It wasn't a bruise. It wasn't a reaction to heat or altitude. It looked engineered. Thomas sat in the chair with his head tilted, breathing slow and shallow. He wasn't fully aware of what was happening. His thoughts came in flashes, patches of light, muffled voices, and a ringing in his ears that wouldn't stop. The crew hovered nearby, forcing themselves to stay calm, trying to talk to him gently. But Winterton wasn't responding normally. Every few seconds he'd flinch, like a shockwave hit him from inside his skull. The on-site medic pressed a cold pack against the swelling, but the moment it touched his skin, Thomas jerked away with a gasp. "It burns," he whispered, his voice thin. But the medic wasn't touching him with heat. He was touching him with ice. The contradiction rattled everyone in the room. Then, the equipment started reacting. The RF meters on the table, devices that had been off, lit up by themselves, spiking into red zones. A handheld spectrum analyzer flickered to life, cycling through frequencies no one recognized. Travis rushed into the room as alarms began chirping, each one reacting to something invisible in the air around Thomas. "Back away from him," Travis warned sharply. The medic hesitated. "He needs treatment. He needs space," Travis shot back. "Something's interfering." As the medic stepped back, something strange happened. The swelling stopped growing, not decreased, not softened, just paused. Travis stared at the readings, then at Thomas. The frequencies were pulsing, rising and falling, in the same exact rhythm as Winterton's heartbeat. It was as if his body was syncing with a signal no one could see. Then Thomas suddenly lifted his head. His eyes were unfocused, pupils dilated, staring at something none of them could see. "It's pressure," he murmured, "like something is pushing down from above." The words made no sense, until an antenna outside the building bent slightly, as if something heavy pressed against the top of it. Eric and Caleb looked at each other in shock. This wasn't environmental. This wasn't medical. This was a targeted event. Something had chosen Thomas Winterton, and whatever hit him was still lingering in the room, invisible and intelligent. The medic whispered the words nobody wanted to hear. Whatever happened to him didn't come from this world. Thomas was released from urgent care with no answers, no concussion, no hematoma, no trauma consistent with the swelling that had nearly crushed the right side of his skull. The doctors were baffled. They'd never seen tissue react that way without any physical cause. They suggested rest, ice, and monitoring. But Thomas knew in his gut that rest wouldn't fix what had happened. Whatever struck him on the ranch wasn't done with him. His wife drove him home slowly through the Utah desert, the sunset blurring into streaks of red and gold. Thomas leaned his head against the window, wincing at every bump in the road. The pain had dulled, but the pressure, the deep internal pushing, hadn't gone away. It felt like fingers pressing from the inside, searching, probing. That night, everything got worse. Winterton woke up around 2 a.m., heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat. His room was pitch dark, but he had the sense that something was standing inches from his bed, watching him breathe. He tried to sit up, but a crushing pressure slammed onto his chest, pinning him down. He gasped for air, barely able to move. His wife stirred beside him. "Thomas, you okay?" The pressure vanished instantly, like a switch flipping off. He sat upright, shaking, struggling to catch his breath. "Something's wrong," he whispered. "Something followed me home." The next day, while resting in the living room, the electronics began malfunctioning. First the TV, then the Wi-Fi router, then the baby monitor. The devices hissed and crackled with static, cycling through channels and frequencies on their own. One moment, the baby monitor showed his toddler sleeping peacefully. The next, it displayed nothing but swirling interference, as if something was passing in front of the camera. But the worst moment happened that evening. Thomas stepped outside for fresh air. The sun was low, painting the sky orange. He leaned on the porch railing, breathing slowly. Then he heard footsteps behind him, heavy, deliberate, dragging. He turned around, expecting to see one of his kids or his wife. The porch was empty, but the footsteps didn't stop. They circled him, just out of sight, pressing the air inward, making it vibrate with an electric hum. His skin prickled. His ears rang. The same invisible force that crushed his skull was now walking around him, closing in. He backed up toward the doorway, terrified. "Stay away from my family," he whispered, not even sure who or what he was talking to. And then everything went still, silent, until the wooden boards of the porch creaked, slowly, as if something enormous stepped directly onto them. Thomas froze. It had followed him home, and now it didn't want to leave. For the next few days, Thomas tried to convince himself that stress and fear were exaggerating everything, but the house refused to let the illusion hold. Every night, the same pattern repeated: flickering lights, shadowy movement in places no shadows should exist, and that oppressive sense of being watched from inches away. His family felt it too, though they didn't know how to describe it. His youngest child began waking up crying, pointing toward the ceiling corner of the room as if something tall and silent stood there. By the fourth night, something crossed the threshold. It started with the sound of dragging footsteps moving down the hallway. Slow, rhythmic, heavy. Thomas bolted upright in bed. His wife stirred beside him, but didn't wake. The footsteps came closer, stopping just outside the door. The air in the room thickened like syrup, pressing against Thomas's ears until they popped. A low vibration hummed through the floorboards, rising like an engine revving in reverse. Then the door creaked open. No one stood there, but the doorway distorted just slightly, like the air was bending around an invisible mass stepping through. The temperature dropped 10 degrees instantly. Thomas could see his breath in the darkness. He reached for the bedside lamp. The moment his fingers touched the switch, the bulb exploded with a pop, showering the nightstand in glass shards. Thomas shielded his eyes, heart hammering in his chest. Everything plunged into darkness. That's when the pressure struck again. But not on his head this time. It hit his ribs, winding him, pushing him sideways on the bed like a physical shove. He gasped and grabbed the frame, trying to pull himself upright. His wife finally woke, confused, asking what was happening. But the moment she spoke, the entity retreated. The pressure lifted. The air warmed. The sense of presence dissolved like smoke fading into the night. But the house still hummed. Thomas scrambled out of bed, adrenaline surging, and checked the hallway. Nothing, just darkness. The air smelled faintly metallic, as if lightning had struck somewhere close. Downstairs, something clicked, an electrical surge. Then the kitchen lights turned on by themselves, glowing with a dim yellow pulse. Thomas stepped toward the stairs. Halfway down, he froze. Standing in the kitchen doorway was a silhouette, tall, impossibly thin, shaped like a human but lacking any human softness. Its outline flickered, as though struggling to hold form in this reality. Thomas's breath caught in his throat, and then, without stepping, without turning, it simply folded out of sight, like someone closing a curtain. The house fell silent again. Thomas clutched the railing, shaking. Whatever attacked him on the ranch wasn't trapped there anymore. It could follow him. It could enter his home. And now it knew exactly where he slept. By the time morning came, Thomas looked like he hadn't slept in a month. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. His wife insisted he go to the hospital. Not one near the ranch, but a larger facility hours away, where no one had heard of skinwalker effects or radiation hotspots. At first, the doctors assumed exhaustion or stress, but that changed the moment they ran imaging scans. The technician reviewing the screens froze. Thomas watched her expression shift from confusion to concern to something close to fear. She excused herself and brought in a second technician, then a third. None of them would explain what they were seeing. When Thomas finally demanded answers, the lead doctor spoke carefully, as if each word carried weight. Your soft tissue shows signs of severe trauma, but there's no external injury, no bruising, no impact marks. It's as if the compression happened from the inside. Thomas felt his stomach drop. That was exactly what he had experienced. The invisible weight crushing down on him, the pressure inside his skull, the force that pushed him across the bed. The doctor continued flipping through the scans. And this part, we can't account for this at all. He pointed to a patch near Thomas's spine, cells that appeared hyperstimulated, glowing faintly in the imaging like they were electrically charged. Thomas whispered, "Is it dangerous?" The doctor hesitated. "We've never seen anything like it. Whatever caused this isn't medically normal." The hospital wanted to keep him for observation, but by afternoon, men Thomas didn't recognize arrived. Quiet, suited, speaking in clipped tones, they asked to review his tests. They asked him what he remembered. They asked him to sign papers. Thomas refused. Within an hour, the hospital discharged him early. No explanation, no follow-up, just a quiet pressure to leave. As Thomas walked out of the building, his phone buzzed with a message from Brandon Fugel. "Don't talk to anyone until we meet. This is bigger than you think." Thomas stared at the message, his pulse pounding. Whatever was happening to his body wasn't just a medical anomaly. Someone knew what caused it, and someone wanted him silent. Thomas didn't want to go back. Every instinct told him the ranch had done something to him, changed something inside him. But avoiding it only made the fear worse. So 2 days after the hospital released him under strange circumstances, he drove back through the gates of Skinwalker Ranch with a knot in his chest and a pounding headache he couldn't shake. The moment he stepped onto the property, the air felt wrong, heavy, electric, like the atmosphere itself recognized him. Travis Taylor and Eric Bard rushed over the second they saw him, relieved but visibly tense. "You shouldn't be here yet," Travis said quietly. "Not after what happened to your head." But Thomas just shook his head. "I need answers." They walked him toward the command center, and the closer he got, the worse the pressure inside his skull became. A low ringing started behind his ears, then a pulsing sensation in his neck. Thomas stopped and held onto a railing, gasping. "It's happening again," Eric muttered, panic creeping into his voice. And then, equipment across the yard began to react. The magnetometers spiked violently. Surveillance cameras tilted toward Thomas as if pulled by an unseen force. Laptops flickered, screens flashing with static. Even the ground-penetrating radar in the shed powered on by itself, emitting a high-pitched whine. Travis stared at Thomas like he'd become part of the phenomenon. "Whatever affected you, it's still connected to you," he whispered. The pressure in Thomas's head intensified. The sky above him seemed to warp, bending the sunlight in subtle, unnatural waves. Shadows on the ground shifted slightly out of sync, like reality itself was glitching around him. And then he felt it. A presence behind him. Not a sound, not a movement. A presence, cold and aware. Thomas spun around, but nothing was there. Not physically. Yet the sensation remained. Watching, waiting, tracking his heartbeat. Travis grabbed his shoulder. "Thomas, your return triggered something." Thomas swallowed hard, his vision blurring for a moment. "No," he said quietly. "It wasn't triggered. It was waiting." Later that evening, once Thomas stabilized enough to speak, the team gathered in the command center to review the surveillance feeds from the exact moment he stepped onto the ranch. Eric cued the footage, his hands trembling just enough for Thomas to notice. At first, everything looked normal. Security cameras tracking the front gate, the weather station readings flickering across the corner of the screen. But then, the moment Thomas appeared on camera, every feed glitched simultaneously. The footage warped, colors inverted, and a violent static pulse surged across all monitors. "Rewind that," Travis said, leaning in. Eric slowed the playback. Thomas watched the footage of himself walking through the gate, except something else appeared just behind him. A distortion, a silhouette made of bending light. It clung to the edge of his shadow like it was tethered to him, like it had followed him back from wherever the pressure in his skull had dragged him that night. "What is that?" Thomas whispered. Eric zoomed in. Reluctantly, the outline sharpened just enough to reveal something unmistakable. 2 points of radiant heat, like eyes, locked directly onto Thomas, even though the figure had no visible face. Travis muttered, "That isn't human." The distortion flickered, then vanished entirely as the footage corrupted. Thomas's stomach dropped. Whatever nearly killed him hadn't just attacked him. It had attached itself to him, and the ranch cameras had caught it, only for the system to immediately try to erase the evidence. Before Thomas could react, an alert chimed across the screens. Motion detected. Same location, same distortion pattern. It was back, watching the command center, watching him. Before anyone could react to the motion alert, the screens flickered again. The same distortion, shifting, bending, almost liquid, moved across the northwest camera. It didn't walk. It glided, as if gravity didn't apply. Travis leaned closer, whispering, "It's tracking a path, straight toward the command center." A cold wind swept through the room, even though every door was sealed. Thomas felt pressure build in the side of his head again, sharp, needling, the same sensation from the night he collapsed. He staggered back, clutching the wall. The cameras glitched harder. Then the distortion stopped, right outside the building. Every monitor went black at the same moment, not powered off, overridden. The team froze, listening as the lights buzzed overhead. The air carried a faint vibration, like a distant engine or something breathing through the walls. "Whatever this is," Eric whispered, "it knows we're watching it." Suddenly, a single camera feed returned. Not outside, inside. A warped image of the command center itself appeared, but something was wrong. The angle was impossible, like the camera was positioned inches above their heads, looking down on them. And in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was the shimmering outline again, watching silently. Thomas felt his head pulse violently, and he collapsed to his knees. Travis rushed to him, but Thomas raised a shaking hand. "Touch me," he gasped. "It reacts when you get close." The monitors began flashing symbols, jagged geometric shapes, mirroring the patterns found burned into the soil months earlier. The entity wasn't attacking this time. It was communicating, and it was using Thomas as the conduit. When the screens finally died again, the pressure in Thomas's skull vanished instantly. He stood, trembling, drenched in sweat. The others stared at him, waiting for an explanation, but he only shook his head. Later, during a private interview filmed for documentation, Thomas finally said the words he had avoided since the incident. "Didn't try to kill me," he whispered. "It tried to mark me." He looked off camera, eyes unfocused. "And whatever that thing is, it's not done with me, not even close." The recording ends there, with Thomas Winterton staring into the darkness behind the camera like something was standing in the room with him, something only he could see.
This is not night vision. It is not a grainy trail camera image or a blurry screenshot pulled from a shaky handheld video. What just came out of Skinwalker Ranch is clear, daylight clear. The kind of clear that removes every argument that has ever been made about ambiguous evidence and replaces it with something that has to be looked at directly and answered directly. No filters, no enhancement, no excuses. This footage just came out, and the conversation it is starting cannot be stopped. Subscribe and watch every second. There is a specific and well-established pattern to the visual evidence that Skinwalker Ranch produces and that the investigation has been documenting across its broadcast seasons. The pattern is one of partial resolution, footage that captures something real and anomalous, but that captures it at a distance, in conditions of reduced light, through camera systems whose sensitivity is being pushed to its operational limits in order to detect phenomenon that the ranch's active zones produce at the boundary of what any instrument can cleanly document. This pattern is not accidental, and it is not a production choice. It reflects the genuine operational reality of documenting phenomenon at a location whose most significant activity occurs at night, at altitude, underground, or in conditions that the investigation's monitoring infrastructure was not specifically designed to capture. Every thermal hit from the mesa zone that the broadcast episodes have shown has been a heat signature resolved at the limit of the camera's range. Every aerial object tracked above the property has been documented at distances where the resolution of even the most sophisticated tracking systems produces imagery that the skeptical viewer can point at and describe as ambiguous. Every underground instrument reading has been a number on a screen rather than a visual document of what generated the number. That is the visual record the investigation has accumulated across its seasons. Extraordinary in its evidential significance, limited in its visual clarity, and consistently vulnerable to the ambiguity arguments that the skeptical community has applied to it with a persistence that the investigation's instrument data has never been able to fully overcome in the court of public opinion. The footage that just came out is different from that record in a way that cannot be overstated. It is different not in the category of phenomenon it documents. The phenomenon is consistent with what the investigation has been tracking across its seasons. It is different in the clarity with which it documents it. Whatever the cameras captured in this footage was captured in conditions that produced resolution the prior investigation record has never achieved. The object is visible. Its characteristics are documentable. Its behavior during the period the cameras tracked it is recorded with a precision that the prior footage record has not produced. And the clarity of what is visible in the footage is what makes it the most significant piece of visual evidence the Skinwalker Ranch investigation has ever produced. Because clarity is the one thing the skeptical argument has never had to genuinely contend with before, it has to contend with it now. The footage did not come from a scheduled night investigation session. It did not come from a targeted deployment of monitoring equipment at a specific active zone based on prior instrument data. It came from a routine morning equipment check, a standard operational procedure in the investigation's monitoring infrastructure, in which team members conduct a physical inspection of the camera systems and sensor arrays positioned across the property to verify that the overnight recording sessions have logged correctly and that the equipment is functioning within its operational parameters. The morning was clear. Visibility across the property was unrestricted by the atmospheric conditions that frequently complicate the investigation's daytime documentation efforts. The ground fog that settles in the lower sections of the property overnight was already burning off by the time the team began the equipment check, and the light quality across the mesa and the surrounding terrain was the kind of flat, even daylight illumination that camera systems produce their cleanest imagery under. Nobody was looking for anything. That is the detail that the team members who were present that morning have consistently emphasized in the accounts they have given of the circumstances of the capture, the absolute ordinariness of what they were doing when the cameras caught what they caught. The equipment check had been proceeding through its standard sequence when the camera operator covering the northern sector of the property noticed something in the live feed from one of the fixed monitoring units positioned on the elevated terrain above the homestead area. The object was not subtle. It was not the kind of peripheral movement or marginal reading that the investigation's experienced team members have learned to assess carefully before flagging as potentially significant. It was there, in the frame, in the middle of the frame, in conditions of full daylight visibility with the camera system operating within its normal parameters and the recording infrastructure logging continuously. The operator called it immediately. By the time the second team member reached the monitoring station and confirmed what the live feed was showing, the recording had already captured the first 40 seconds of what would become the clearest piece of anomalous visual evidence the Skinwalker Ranch investigation has ever produced. What happened in the next 4 minutes and change is what the footage documents. And what the footage documents in those 4 minutes is what the rest of this video is going to break down completely. The object visible in the Skinwalker Ranch footage appears in the frame at the upper left quadrant of the camera's field of view and moves through the frame across the full duration of the recorded sequence, 4 minutes and 38 seconds from first appearance to the point at which the object exits the camera's coverage area. This description sounds straightforward. What makes it significant is what the frame-by-frame analysis of that movement produces in terms of the object's characteristics, its behavior, and the specific relationship between its documented properties and every conventional explanation that the analysis process applied to it. The object's dimensions are the first characteristic the frame-by-frame analysis establishes with clarity. It is large, not large in the ambiguous sense of a thermal return whose size is difficult to assess at distance, large in the specific and measurable sense of an object whose apparent dimensions, calculated against the known dimensions of the terrain features visible in the same frame, place it significantly outside the size range of any conventional aircraft in the civilian or known military inventory. The shape is the second characteristic the analysis documents. The object is not spherical in the way that the atmospheric plasma phenomenon or the ball lightning explanations that the skeptical community applies to similar footage would predict. It has consistent geometry across the full duration of the recording, a geometry that does not change as the object moves through the frame, does not distort in the manner of an atmospheric optical phenomenon, and does not exhibit the irregular variation that characterizes any object whose appearance is the product of light interacting with a non-solid medium. The movement is the third characteristic and the one that the analysis process found most resistant to any conventional explanation. The object's trajectory through the frame is not consistent with ballistic movement, the curved path a projectile or a falling object produces under the influence of gravity. It is not consistent with powered aerodynamic flight, the smooth curves and banked turns of a fixed-wing or rotary-wing aircraft operating within known aerodynamic constraints. It changes direction twice during the recorded sequence. Each direction change is instantaneous in the frame-by-frame record, present in one direction in one frame, present in a different direction in the next, with no transitional frames showing the arc that any conventional flight vehicle produces when changing direction. Instantaneous direction change at the velocity the object is maintaining is not aerodynamically possible for any known vehicle. The footage documents it happening twice. Travis Taylor reviewed the footage within hours of its capture. His response to the initial viewing has been documented by everyone present during the review session and described with a consistency across those independent accounts that communicates something specific about the quality of what the footage produced in a physicist whose professional career has been built around the rigorous application of scientific methodology to exactly the class of phenomenon the footage documents. Taylor did not react dramatically. That is the first and most significant thing about his response. He watched the footage through its full duration without speaking. He asked for it to be replayed. He watched it a second time. He asked a single technical question about the camera system's operational parameters during the recording. a question whose specific content reflects the systematic process of eliminating equipment artifact as a conventional explanation before engaging with the implications of what the footage shows. The answer to the question confirmed that the camera was operating within its normal parameters and that the recording infrastructure was logging correctly throughout the sequence. Taylor watched the footage a third time. Then he said 4 words that the accounts of everyone present describe with identical precision. He said, "Run the numbers." That instruction initiated the technical analysis process that produced the frame-by-frame documentation described in the prior section of this video. Taylor's direction of that analysis process across the hours that followed the initial viewing is documented in the investigation's internal record and reflects his professional commitment to establishing what the footage shows through quantitative analysis rather than qualitative impression. The velocity calculations he directed produced numbers that he has subsequently described in his careful public language as being in a range that requires explanation. The direction change analysis produced results that his physics background gives him the specific vocabulary to characterize with precision, and the characterization he has used in the limited public references he has made to the footage is the most direct statement he has made about any piece of Skinwalker Ranch evidence in his seasons on the property. He said the direction changes documented in the footage are not consistent with any propulsion system whose operating principles are represented in the current scientific literature, not inconsistent with known aircraft, not inconsistent with known atmospheric phenomena, not consistent with any propulsion system in the current scientific literature. That is a physicist with a classified defense research background telling you that what the footage shows is operating on principles his professional knowledge does not account for. The footage was submitted for independent technical analysis within 48 hours of its capture, a decision that reflected both the investigation's standard protocol for significant evidence and the specific quality of what the footage contained that made independent verification a priority rather than a procedural formality. The analysts selected for the independent review were chosen on the basis of their professional backgrounds in optical physics, aerospace engineering, and digital imaging forensics, disciplines whose combined relevance to the specific questions the footage raised made their assessments the most technically defensible available. None of the 3 analysts had prior engagement with the Skinwalker Ranch investigation. None of them were told the footage's origin before conducting their initial analysis. The digital imaging forensics assessment was the first to be completed and the first to address the question that every piece of anomalous footage must answer before its content can be seriously evaluated, whether the footage is authentic. The forensics assessment examined the recording's metadata, the pixel-level consistency of the object across frames, the relationship between the object's visual characteristics and the lighting environment documented in the surrounding frame, and the absence or presence of the digital artifacts that post-production compositing and CGI insertion produce in video footage at the pixel level. The assessment's conclusion was unambiguous. The footage has not been altered. The object is present in the original recording. Its visual characteristics are consistent with a physical object present in the environment when the camera was recording, rather than an element introduced into the footage after the fact. The optical physics assessment addressed the question of whether the object's visual characteristics are consistent with any known natural optical phenomenon, atmospheric optical effects, lens artifacts, light diffraction events, or any of the other conventional explanations that the skeptical literature applies to anomalous aerial footage. The conclusion was that the object's consistency across the full duration of the recording, its behavior during the 2 direction changes, and its dimensional relationship to the terrain features in the same frame are collectively inconsistent with any natural optical phenomenon in the reference literature. The aerospace engineering assessment addressed the question of the object's flight characteristics and produced the finding that the investigation team's own analysis had already established, that the direction changes documented in the footage are not achievable by any known aerospace vehicle operating within known aerodynamic or propulsive constraints. 3 independent analysts, 3 disciplines, 1 conclusion: what the footage shows is real and is not explicable within any conventional framework any of the 3 analysts' professional backgrounds provided. Every piece of Skinwalker Ranch evidence that preceded this footage, every thermal hit, every electromagnetic reading, every instrument anomaly and crew medical incident and underground vibration signature was evidence of the phenomenon's effects rather than evidence of the phenomenon itself. The instruments detected what the phenomenon did to the electromagnetic environment, to the underground geological formation, to the physical bodies of the crew members who spent time in the active zones. The cameras documented the phenomenon's outputs, the light signatures, the heat signatures, the aerial objects whose visual resolution at distance left the question of their fundamental nature perpetually open. What the clear footage provides that none of the prior evidence provided is a direct visual record of the phenomenon at a resolution sufficient to document its intrinsic characteristics rather than just its effects. And what those intrinsic characteristics? The object's consistent geometry, its dimensional scale, its response to whatever environmental or investigative conditions produce the two-direction changes establish about the nature of the phenomenon is what makes the footage categorically different from everything the investigation has previously produced. The geometry is manufactured. That is the conclusion that the optical physics analysis forces on anyone who applies it honestly to what the footage shows. The object's shape is not the shape that natural processes produce. Natural aerial phenomena, plasma formations, ice crystal optical effects, atmospheric lensing events, do not produce objects with consistent geometric profiles that are maintained across minutes of movement through a changing atmospheric environment. The object in the footage maintains its geometry from first frame to last. That maintenance is the signature of construction rather than natural process. Something made it that shape, and the shape is being maintained actively rather than persisting passively. The scale is significant in a specific way that the prior footage record's ambiguity had prevented from being established. The object is large. Its calculated dimensions place it in a size category that raises specific questions about where it goes when it is not visible above the property. Questions whose most direct answer points at the underground formation that the investigation has been mapping beneath the mesa. An object of those dimensions transitioning from the airspace above the mesa to the underground formation beneath it would produce exactly the kind of surface and subsurface instrument signatures the investigation has been documenting across its seasons. The footage may not be new evidence of a new phenomenon. It may be the clearest visual documentation yet of the mechanism connecting the aerial activity above the ranch to the underground activity beneath it. Brandon Fugel's public response to the footage's release was made in a statement whose careful construction reflects the same quality of managed communication that has characterized every significant public disclosure he has made about the investigation across his years of ownership. The statement confirms the footage's authenticity. It confirms that the footage has been subjected to independent technical analysis, whose findings he describes in general terms, consistent with what the analysis actually established. It confirms that the investigation is treating the footage as significant within the ongoing research program, and that the findings it produces will be incorporated into the investigation's accumulating evidence record. What the statement does not contain is as significant as what it does. Fugel does not characterize what the footage shows. He confirms that it shows something, and that the something has been independently verified as real and has been technically analyzed by qualified professionals. He does not go further than that. The specific restraint with which he manages the characterization question, stopping at the point of confirming reality and verified analysis without extending to any description of what the verified real thing is behavior that the audience that has followed Fugel across the investigation seasons will recognize as his standard approach to the most significant evidence the investigation produces. He manages the characterization of the most significant findings most carefully. The inverse relationship between the significance of the evidence and the specificity of his public characterization of it is a consistent pattern in his communication record that the most attentive viewers of the investigation have noted across multiple seasons. What it communicates about this footage is that it is in the highest category of significance that the investigation has produced, that what it shows is something whose direct public characterization carries implications that Fugel has determined require management rather than plain statement. The people who have been closest to Fugel during the period following the footage's capture and the subsequent analysis have described his private response to the findings with a consistency that indicates something specific about where he is in his relationship to the investigation's most recent evidence. He is not surprised. He is not unsettled in the way that unexpected evidence unsettles. He is the way a person is when something they have been anticipating for a long time has finally produced itself in a form that is no longer deniable. The footage confirmed something he already knew was there. What it confirmed, what the footage shows that Fugel's careful statement declines to characterize, is what the final sections of this video will address directly. The footage's public release produced a response from the institutional ecosystem surrounding the Skinwalker Skinwalker Ranch investigation that is itself significant evidence about the nature of what the footage documents. The response came quickly, faster than the ordinary tempo of institutional engagement with publicly released anomalous evidence typically produces, and it came from directions that the investigation's public profile alone does not account for. The UAP disclosure community, the network of researchers, former government officials, journalists, and congressional staffers whose professional focus is the intersection of anomalous aerial phenomenon and government transparency, engaged with the footage within hours of its release with a specificity of attention that reflects something about the footage's content beyond its general significance as Skinwalker Ranch evidence. The specific technical characteristics that the UAP disclosure community's most credible voices focused on in their assessments of the footage, the direction changes, the dimensional scale, the geometric consistency, are characteristics that the classified UAP evidence record, whose existence has been established through congressional testimony and intelligence community disclosures, apparently contains comparisons for. Former government officials whose prior public statements about UAP evidence have been specific and credible made references in their assessments of the footage to comparisons they were careful not to make explicit, references that communicated awareness of a classified evidence record whose contents correspond to what the Skinwalker Ranch footage documents without stating that correspondence directly. The congressional UAP oversight infrastructure whose development since 2017 has produced the most significant public acknowledgement of anomalous aerial phenomenon in government history, engaged with the footage in ways that reflect institutional awareness of its significance extending beyond the paranormal television audience the investigation normally addresses. Staffers whose professional focus is UAP evidence assessment made inquiries about the footage's technical documentation package, the kind of inquiries that reflect interest in whether the evidence meets the evidentiary standard for inclusion in the classified assessment processes whose existence the congressional oversight work has established. The government's relationship to what the Skinwalker Ranch cameras have been documenting across the investigation seasons has always been the most significant and least publicly addressed dimension of the investigation's broader context. The response to this footage's release suggests that the relationship between what the investigation's cameras just documented in daylight and what the classified UAP evidence record contains is closer than the managed public distance between those two bodies of evidence has previously allowed to be acknowledged. Every prior piece of Skinwalker Ranch visual evidence has been vulnerable to one argument: ambiguity, distance, low light, instrument readings rather than images. The skeptical community has lived in that ambiguity for years, and it has been effective because the prior footage record never fully closed the door on conventional explanation. This footage closes it. What was documented above Skinwalker Ranch in full daylight by a camera operating within its normal parameters cannot be made ambiguous by distance or conditions or the limitations of night vision technology. 3 independent analysts confirmed it is real. A directed energy physicist confirmed the direction changes are not consistent with any propulsion system in the current scientific literature. Brandon Fugel confirmed its significance without characterizing what it shows, which is itself the characterization. The investigation has been asking a question for 5 seasons. The clear footage is that question being asked in a form that requires a direct answer for the first time, not an instrument reading, not a thermal signature at the limit of resolution, a clear image in daylight of something that should not be there. The answer that image demands is the conversation everything the ranch has produced has been building toward.